At 60 years old, a woman discovers she has a terminal illness and throws all her belongings in the trash. But inside the trash, she finds something that changes her life. Hello, welcome, like, subscribe and turn on notifications. Raimunda woke up early that day. She was excited to go to church. Very religious. The woman never missed a single mass. Despite living alone at the age of 60 and having no close relatives, she said that God was always with her. After putting on her best clothes and walking to church, Raimunda thought about how her children were doing. When she turned 18, Raimunda married a man 20 years older than her. It wasn't what she wanted, but her parents said it was the best thing for the young woman. Luckily for her, her husband was a kind person who treated her well. At first, there was no love between the two, but the affection and trust between them grew and they both fell in love. A little over a year later, Raimunda became pregnant, but lost her son before he was born. To make matters worse, the doctor told her that she would no longer be able to have children. This was the worst news she could have. Raimunda was afraid that her husband would leave her for another woman who could conceive children for him. So she talked to him and they both decided to adopt a child. So the two had their first child, but Raimunda didn't stop there. In the space of 7 years, they adopted 5 children. She raised them with great care and affection, always putting them first. The 5 were the love of her life and the reason for her life. On the other hand, Raimunda's husband seemed distant and complained that his wife was always doing something for the children or busy with them. Raimunda tried to argue with her husband that taking care of 5 children took up all of her time, but he didn't seem to understand if he didn't want to accept this fact. This strained their marriage and he started sleeping away from home. Raimunda spent nights awake worrying about her husband's whereabouts, but he didn't seem to care what she thought about it. One time, he spent 3 days away from home and didn't tell her where he was. When he got home, he found Raimunda furious as a beast. The couple argued and her husband, in a moment of anger, said that he was seeing another woman who was paying attention to him. Raimunda threw him out of the house and told him never to come back. And so he did, but a month later he came back home regretting what he had done. But Raimunda was a firm woman, and once she made a decision, she would not go back on it. She threw him out of the house again and told him to live with his lover, who was a better woman than she. He tried to get back together with her several times, but his attempts were in vain. Over time, he stopped talking to her. Weeks had passed without her husband trying to reconcile, but Raimunda heard a knock on the door and already imagined it was him. However, the man who appeared was someone unknown. He was wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. Raimunda's heart raced. She felt that something was wrong and her assumptions were confirmed. Her husband no longer lived with his lover and was truly regretful. He wanted to get back together with her, but due to Raimunda's refusals, he went to more and more bars to forget the life he had lost with her. After spending the night at a bar, he drove to her house to try to get back together again. But he couldn't reach his destination because a car appeared right in front of his drunken vision. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt and the accident was fatal. The man in front of Raimunda was now a lawyer who was handing over the entire inheritance left by her husband. From that day on, she owned several lands, houses, and a huge lifetime salary. Raimunda signed all the documents and closed the door. Only then did tears start to run down her face. Her husband's family had already buried him and didn't tell her, as they blamed her for all the suffering he was going through in those last months. Although the pain of mourning was terrible, Raimunda had to remain strong for her 5 children. She devoted herself even more to all of them and was very strict with their education and upbringing. She wanted them to be successful and independent people. Decades passed and Raimunda managed to raise all her children, but the way her life looked got out of control. As her children grew up, they left home and rarely visited her. Most of them lived in another state and already had families of their own. She hadn't seen some of her children for almost 10 years. Raimunda was always very strict with them and demanded a lot from them. She did this because she loved them and wanted them to be better people than she was. However, she never imagined that this would drive them apart and that each of their greatest desires was to be able to stay away from her. Of her 5 adopted children, the only one who still visited her was Edvaldo, her youngest son. However, of all her children, this was the only one that Raimunda did not want by her side. Raimunda discovered that Edvaldo was dating a young man and kicked him out of the house. With nowhere to live, her son went to live with his boyfriend, but he still visited his elderly mother to see how she was doing, but Raimunda avoided contact with him as much as possible. Returning to the present, Raimunda was in church, praying that her children who were far away would visit her, and that her son Edvaldo would leave his boyfriend and find a woman who would change his life. She loved her children and was feeling lonely without them. Raimunda was praying on her knees and stood up, but felt a strong dizziness and fell abruptly to the floor of the church. Everything was spinning, and all she could see were people coming towards her to help her. Her vision grew even darker until she passed out. When she opened her eyes, Raimunda was in the hospital. There were some nurses by her side, and the doctor was soon called. According to the doctor, the fall could have been caused by the drop in blood pressure when she stood up, but some tests would be done, but it didn't seem serious. A few minutes later, Edvaldo entered the hospital room, panting and worried about his mother. Raimunda tried to calm him down by saying that she was feeling fine, that it was just an accident. Edvaldo was very worried, and his eyes were red as if he was going to cry. It was clear that he loved his mother, even though she had thrown him out of the house. Raimunda felt a little regret for having done this to her son at that moment. But when she looked at the bedroom door, there was her son's boyfriend. At that moment, her expression changed and she told her son to leave, because she needed to rest. Edvaldo realized what had happened and did not argue with his mother. Raimunda stayed alone in her room and waited for her other children to call, but none of them called her. The next day, before discharging Raimunda, the doctor said that the test results were back and that he had something to show her. Raimunda couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You have a brain tumor. It is in an area that cannot be removed. We will need to do more tests to find out if it is malignant or benign and also if it is growing." Raimunda didn't know what to think. She just went home and prayed that it was nothing serious. In the following days, she did several tests and unfortunately the worst was confirmed. It was a malignant tumor that was growing, and she had little time left to live. A cloud of despair hung over Raimunda. She had always been a devout woman who did good. She adopted 5 children who were abandoned by their parents, and yet she was presented with such a cruel fate. She wondered why this had happened to her. That day she did not pray. Her faith was shaken. The next morning she told Edvaldo about her illness. Her son ran to her house and hugged her. Edvaldo cried like a child. Raimunda tried to stay strong for her son and said that she had lived enough. She had lived 60 years on this earth and that now her time was up. Edvaldo could not accept that his mother was in a terminal stage. From that day on, he went to his mother's house every day and sometimes even slept there. One night, Raimunda couldn't sleep and went to the living room to drink water, but found Edvaldo in front of the computer. On the computer screen, she could see that he was talking to his 4 other brothers. Edvaldo made a video call with his other siblings who lived far away. Raimunda hid and listened to what they were talking about. Edvaldo begged them to visit their mother, as he didn't know how long she would still be alive. But the answer from each one surprised both Edvaldo and Raimunda. One of them was on vacation in the Maldives and would not interrupt his vacation. Another was focused on work and could not waste time. The other 2 women said that they already had families and that they were very busy taking care of their families and with their jobs. All of this made Raimunda cry, but the worst was yet to come. "When she dies, let us know. Maybe if I have time, I'll go to her funeral." One of the sons said this and the others said the same for them. Raimunda couldn't bear to hear those words and ran to the room. She didn't sleep, she just cried. Raimunda didn't imagine that her children would be as apathetic as she was towards her. It was as if she were a stranger to them. Only Edvaldo was by her side, the son she mistreated the most. In the days that followed, Raimunda barely showed any expression. It was as if she had already given in to her imminent fate. Edvaldo went to her house every day, washed her clothes, changed the sheets on the bed, made lunch and dinner, and talked to her mother. Raimunda looked at her only son who was there for her and felt grateful that he was with her. One day, while Edvaldo was making lunch, Raimunda went out to water her plants. There was a car parked in front of her house, and inside it a man was sleeping uncomfortably. It was her son's boyfriend. Raimunda didn't even know his name. She went to the car and knocked on the window. The boy woke up scared and rolled down the car window. "Don't you want to come in for lunch? Edvaldo is finishing lunch, and afterwards, if you want, you can sleep a little in bed. It's more comfortable than in the car." The boy shyly accepted the invitation and thanked him. "What's your name?" Raimunda asked. "Renato," he replied. "Come in, Renato, welcome." Edvaldo was in disbelief when he saw Renato enter his mother's house. The three of them had lunch at the table and had a long conversation. Raimunda discovered that Edvaldo had quit his job so he could dedicate himself completely to her. Meanwhile, Renato worked and supported the family. A terrible feeling ran through Raimunda's heart. Her son, whom she had thrown out of her home, was sacrificing himself for her. She wanted to say many things to him, but all she could do was ask for forgiveness. Mother and son grew closer, and Raimunda felt more at peace with her fate. But she was not prepared for the first symptoms. Weeks later, Raimunda was feeling strange, her memory was failing, and because of this she forgot to turn the stove on. A small fire started in her kitchen, but she was soon able to contain it. This first sign that the disease was progressing made her have a fit of rage. She screamed, asking why this was happening to her, a person who had always been so devout. Raimunda, in a fit of rage, broke several objects in her house. She wanted to give up everything, and without knowing why, she felt like throwing everything she had in the trash. Why would a person on the verge of death need so many things? Crying, she grabbed clothes and objects and went to the trash container that was a block away from her house. She threw everything in there and leaned on the container and cried nonstop. Life isn't fair, she thought. Does God really like me? She wondered. Just then she heard a strange noise coming from the trash. She couldn't tell what it was, but she looked and saw nothing. The noise got louder, and Raimunda realized it wasn't coming from the trash but from the side of the container. There was a basket, and inside the basket was a baby. "Oh my God!" Raimunda screamed. The woman wrapped the baby in her arms and went to her house. Edvaldo and Renato were there worried, because they found everything broken and the kitchen burned. But they soon forgot about it when they saw Raimunda with a baby in her arms. "Whose mother is this baby?" Edvaldo asked. Raimunda explained everything to them. Edvaldo called the police, who soon arrived at the house. Raimunda explained everything to them, and the police said that the baby would be taken to an orphanage while they investigated how he ended up there. Despite spending only a few hours with the little baby, Raimunda felt a strong affection for him. She remembered when she held each of her children in her arms. One thought wouldn't leave her head. Would she raise that baby? Raimunda told Edvaldo that she would file an adoption process if the parents were not found. Edvaldo couldn't believe what his mother was about to do. He respectfully said, "Mom, you're already 60 years old, and besides..." He stopped talking for a moment. "Am I about to die?" Raimunda completed his sentence. Edvaldo was embarrassed and lowered his head. "Don't worry, my son. I lost my faith for a moment, but something made me go to that place, and deep down I feel that I must take care of this child. Don't worry." Raimunda was determined. A few days later, she learned more about the baby's case. The baby's name was Levi. His mother died during childbirth, and his father raised him. However, he suspected that the child was not his because he was very different from him. After taking a DNA test, he discovered that he was not Levi's father. Angry at his wife's betrayal, he would not raise another man's baby, nor would he go after the real father. So he left the child to his own devices, where fate would take care of him. The man was arrested for abandonment, and the child's real father would remain a secret, as only the mother knew who he was. Raimunda filed for adoption, and, to Edvaldo's surprise, she was granted custody of the child. Raimunda hid her medical history, as it would certainly interfere with the adoption. Edvaldo worried about his mother and the future of this child, but Raimunda seemed strangely complete and calm. It was as if she found a reason greater than her illness and even greater than her own life to worry. Now there was nothing left to do but take care of the little baby. Time passed. Levi grew up into a strong and healthy boy. Raimunda dedicated all her time to taking care of him and giving him as much affection as possible, because she didn't know how long she would be by his side. And without knowing her last day of life, she always told him that she loved him, and the young boy always told her that he loved her. Strangely, the symptoms stopped. Raimunda no longer felt anything. The tests showed that the tumor was still there, but it was not growing or shrinking. Even so, the doctors said that it could grow back at any moment and they didn't know how long she had to live. Raimunda just smiled at the medical reports. She was at peace. She watched Levi grow up, play, get his first job, be happy with his first girlfriend, and cry over his first breakup. She watched her son live. 20 years after meeting Levi, Raimunda, at the age of 80, was sitting in front of her house. Edvaldo and Renato, who were now married, were passing by her house, and Edvaldo said he was going to the supermarket and asked if Raimunda wanted anything. She said no, that she had everything she wanted, and with a smile she said she loved her son and told him to be careful. A few minutes later, Levi came home from work. His girlfriend gave him a ride in her car. The two said goodbye and Levi kissed his mother on the cheek. "Mom, I asked Daniele to marry me and she accepted. I got promoted today and that's why I'll be able to pay for our wedding." Raimunda smiled. "My son, I'm so happy. I'm sure you'll be very happy. She's a great girl. I love you very much." "I love you too, Mom." The two hugged and Levi went into the house. Raimunda was happy. She felt a sense of gratitude for having two wonderful children in her life, and for being able to love so much and be loved in return. As she sat in her chair, she closed her eyes and remembered a quote from Mother Teresa of Calcutta. "A happy heart is an inevitable result of a heart burning with love." And her heart was happy because she loved a lot. However, the 2 extra decades that God had given her were coming to an end. Raimunda felt that as she closed her eyes, her life was draining from her body. "Thank you, God. I have been very blessed." And with these last thoughts, Raimunda took her last breath. Levi and Edvaldo were devastated by their mother's departure. But what comforted them was the smile she had on her face even after her soul left her body. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.